Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel once again. My name is Amir Merchant and I am a licensed immigration advisor for New Zealand and a former migration agent for Australia, currently based in Auckland. On this channel, we share practical guidance on visa processes, immigration pathways, and related topics to help you make informed decisions. If you are unsure about your visa options or planning your next step, consider subscribing and enabling notifications so you stay updated with the latest developments. Before continuing, please review the legal disclaimer provided in the comment section of this video. What if I told you that one trade agreement between India and New Zealand could quietly reshape how thousands of people move, work, study, and settle across both countries over the next decade? Not just trade, not just tariffs, but real human movement, real jobs, real immigration pathways, and real risks that almost nobody is fully talking about yet. Because while headlines are celebrating a historic free trade agreement between India and New Zealand, what sits underneath the economic language is something far more powerful, a redesigned immigration and labor mobility framework. And whether you are a student, skilled worker, employer, or migration advisor, this agreement is going to matter more than most people realize. Now, stay with this because what I'm about to break down is not just policy theory. This is about actual visa pathways, actual quotas, actual opportunities, and yes, the real concerns being raised right now about worker protection and exploitation risks. And by the end of this video, you will clearly understand who benefits the most, who is likely to face restrictions, what new visa pathways are being created, and where the real pressure points in this system are going to emerge. Let's start from the beginning. The India-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement is not just a trade deal in the traditional sense. It is a hybrid agreement, part trade, part services expansion, part immigration mobility framework, and that combination is exactly why it is being described as a once-in-a-generation shift in bilateral relations, because historically, immigration and trade were treated separately, but now they are being connected through structured mobility channels, and that changes everything. Let's break down the immigration side first. One of the most significant elements of this agreement is the expansion of temporary entry pathways for Indian nationals into New Zealand. This includes skilled occupations, sector-based employment routes, and expanded working holiday access. In simple terms, New Zealand is opening more structured channels for Indian workers to enter legally for work purposes in areas where labor shortages exist. These are not permanent residency pathways, at least not directly. They are controlled temporary mobility systems, and that is an important distinction because it means the system is designed to fill workforce gaps without fully liberalizing long-term migration. Now, here is where the opportunity side becomes very clear. New Zealand has persistent labor shortages in sectors like construction, agriculture, hospitality, aged care, logistics, and certain technical trades. And India has a large, young, and skilled workforce with strong demand for overseas opportunities. So the FTA essentially creates a matching mechanism. Labor demand meets labor supply, but it is structured through visas, not open migration. And this is where things get interesting. Reports linked to the agreement indicate the introduction of new temporary work entry channels for Indian professionals alongside expanded post-study work rights for students already in New Zealand. This means Indian students studying in New Zealand could see improved pathways to remain in the country after graduation, especially in high-demand skill areas. But here is the key point. These pathways are still tightly controlled. They depend on occupation lists, employer accreditation, and labor market tests. So while the door is opening wider, it is not fully open. Now let's talk about the working holiday angle. Working holiday schemes are often overlooked, but they play a critical role in early stage migration exposure. Under the expanded framework, a larger number of young Indian nationals are expected to gain short-term work rights in New Zealand under defined quotas These schemes are usually limited in duration and scope, but they create early entry points into the labor market, and for many, that becomes the first step into longer-term migration pathways. Now, at this point, everything sounds like opportunity. More visas, more mobility, more access. But this is where the conversation becomes more complex. Because alongside these opportunities, serious concerns are being raised by unions and labor advocates. And the concern is not about the agreement itself. It is about what happens after implementation. Historically, New Zealand has faced documented cases of migrant worker exploitation. Issues like underpayment, wage theft, poor working conditions, and employer dependency have all been reported across multiple sectors. And when you introduce large scale mobility frameworks tied to employer sponsorship or visa dependency, you also introduce structural vulnerability. Because in many cases, migrant workers cannot easily change employers without affecting their visa status, and that creates a power imbalance. Now, this is the core concern being raised. If labor mobility increases faster than enforcement capacity, could exploitation risks increase as well? And this is where the debate becomes very real. Supporters of the agreement argue that all existing labor laws in New Zealand remain fully in force. They say that migrant workers are protected under the same legal framework as domestic workers. They also highlight that visa systems are designed with safeguards, compliance checks, and employer obligations. But critics are not convinced that legal frameworks alone are enough. Because enforcement is not just about laws on paper, it is about monitoring, awareness, reporting systems, and accessibility of protection mechanisms. And in real world migration systems, those elements are often uneven. Now, let's pause here for a moment because this is important. Every major immigration expansion globally follows a similar pattern. First comes opportunity creation, then comes labor demand pressure, then comes rapid inflow of workers, and finally comes a phase where enforcement systems are tested. And that is exactly why this agreement is being closely watched, because New Zealand is not just expanding trade with India, it is increasing long-term dependency on Indian labor mobility in key sectors, and India, on the other hand, is creating new outward migration pathways for its skilled and semi-skilled workforce. So what does this mean for students? This is one of the biggest shifts. Indian students in New Zealand could benefit from more structured post-study work pathways, better alignment between study fields and occupation shortages, and improved chances of transitioning into skilled employment. But there is a catch. Competition will also increase because more structured pathways attract more applicants and visa selection becomes more competitive, not less. So outcomes will depend heavily on qualification relevance, employer demand, and immigration settings. Now let's talk about skilled workers. This is where the most significant movement is expected. Sectors like engineering, IT, healthcare support, trades, and agriculture-linked technical roles are likely to see increased recruitment from India. But again, it is controlled migration, not open migration, which means employers will play a central role. And employer accreditation becomes a key gatekeeping mechanism. And this leads to another important question. Who benefits more from this agreement? Economically, both countries benefit. India gains expanded employment channels for its workforce. New Zealand gains access to a larger labor pool to address shortages. But on a human level, outcomes will vary significantly depending on individual circumstances, employer behavior, and regulatory enforcement. And that is why this agreement is not just about economics, it is about systems. Now let's bring this together. The India-New Zealand FTA represents a shift from traditional trade agreements into integrated mobility frameworks. It connects trade, education, employment, and migration into a single policy ecosystem. And that ecosystem will evolve over time. But the biggest risk factor is not the agreement itself, it is implementation pressure. Because when migration demand increases, systems are tested. And when systems are tested, gaps can appear, which is why unions and worker advocates are already calling for stronger safeguards, clearer protections, and better monitoring mechanisms before full-scale implementation begins. Now, before we close, let's zoom out. What we are really seeing here is a structural realignment. India is positioning itself as a global labor and services supplier economy. New Zealand is positioning itself as a selective skills-based migration destination tied to economic demand. And the FTA is the bridge connecting those two objectives. But bridges only work if both sides are stable. And the stability will depend on how carefully this agreement is implemented over the coming years. Because the real story is not the signing of the agreement. The real story is what happens next, who moves, who stays, who benefits, and who gets left behind in the system that is now being built. And that is why this is one of the most important immigration developments between India and New Zealand in decades. Not because it changes everything overnight, but because it slowly changes the structure underneath everything, and structural changes are the ones that shape the next generation of migration. If you found this breakdown useful, the next step is understanding exactly how each visa pathway works in practice, including eligibility timelines and real-world success rates, because that is where strategy begins. And strategy is what separates opportunity from outcome. If you found this video valuable, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel, because we break down real immigration pathways, real strategies, and real insights so you can make informed decisions without falling into common traps. And we can assist you to simplify this entire complex process and guide you from start to finish. No worries. Do get in touch with us now on our WhatsApp mobile number +642217860007, also provided in the comment section of this video, and we will get in touch with you as soon as possible. Your journey deserves the right start, and it starts with the right consultation. And now you have it. Thank you for watching.